Broadcasting from the council back room here today, the boardroom. We've done roll call already, so we're going to jump to the next part of our agenda, which is conflicts of interest disclosure. And why don't we go ahead and start over here with you, Lisa, and we'll go around the table. Thanks.
Elisa Heim. I own a business, Big Story Bookstore on Greenwood and 3rd. Potential conflict of interest.
John Fisher, my employer, owns property on Franklin Avenue and work doing consulting engineering for a number of projects in the area. I don't know if there's any conflicts with today's agenda, but.
Elisa Chang, no conflicts of interest.
Elaine Fridella, no conflict.
Dale Van Valkenburg, my employer, Brooks Resources, is in a partnership that owns property at both 100 Hawthorne and 181 Franklin that we intend to develop someday. So there's a potential conflict of interest.
Eric Woodall, Chamber of Commerce, no conflicts.
Rich Colton, Ben Park and Rec, no conflicts.
Corey Harlan, Central Oregon Land Watch, no conflicts.
And I think there's a couple members online.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, John Halen. I'm a business owner. I own an unofficial logging company in the core district. Potential conflict of interest.
And how about Eric?
Hi, Eric Lint, Cascades East Transit and COIC, non-voting member.
And Whitney, I think, is the last ex officio up there.
Hi, everyone. Whitney Hale, Deschutes County, also a non-voting member. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to approving meeting minutes. So we have two sets of meeting minutes to approve. So the first is going to be for December and March, and those are the CAB minutes. And then we'll need the Business Assistance Subcommittee to approve their minutes from April 23rd. So the first will be approving the minutes from December and March. Those are the CAB minutes. And so do we have a motion to approve those?
So moved.
And a second. All those in favor of approving the December and March CAB minutes?
Excuse me, Chair, who was the first? I didn't catch that.
The first was Dale. And I believe that was unanimous. Okay. And we'll move on to April 23rd, the Business Assistance Subcommittee. We'll need those members to motion that approval and vote on that approval.
It's just Elaine, John, and Elisa that can. Motion to approve. Second minutes. So Lisa with the motion, Elaine with the second. And then
No one in favor.
John Halen, if you could vote, that would, yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone. So now we're going to get into the heart of our agenda today. So the Core Area Advisory Board 2024 Work Plan Update. Allie's going to lead us through that, and then we'll keep moving through the rest of our agenda, knowing we're a little tight on time today, but I think we can get through it all. So take it away, Allie.
Okay, thanks for bearing with the technical difficulties. For staff that came in, the microphones in council chamber are not working, so that's why we're in the boardroom. Just a reminder that CAB's going to be meeting quarterly this year. So we're meeting May 16th. The next meeting that we'll meet as a full group will be August 15th. We did get a request, and also just for functionality, we're looking at moving the November.
Allie, you went out. We can't hear you.
Yeah, everybody froze.
For Borough to make a recommendation before the end of the year. So,
Excuse me, Allie, you froze, so we didn't hear anything past August 15th.
Okay, we're looking at revising the November 14th date to November 7th. So just folks, if you can look ahead at your calendars and make sure that that date still works for you, so we have a quorum. Forget the part that says today, but at your last meeting, you formed two new CAB subcommittees. So the Development Code Subcommittee is going to meet for the first time on May 30th. So week and a half-ish. The Business Assistance Subcommittee met once already on April 23rd, and that was the minutes that were just approved. Hopefully folks kind of got a chance to just look over how that meeting went. I'll give a preview of some of the initial direction we got from that subcommittee. They're going to meet again one more time in July, and then they would potentially meet in October, depending on the number of applications that we get to the program once we reopen the call for projects. So today we're kind of talking about the business assistance program and an update from that subcommittee. We'll get an update from the Bend Park and Recreation District about their comprehensive plan, updates that they're making specifically around core area plans, for park search areas. And then we'll go over the draft performance metrics. At your next meeting, we'll actually look at those business assistance program changes, approve the metrics, get probably another update on Midtown Crossing, since a lot will be going on with that project. And then we'll also hear about incentives and budget updates. In November, we'll really be those business assistance program rewards. We'll have more information about the budget because we get forecasts in October. And then we'll also kind of get an update from the development code subcommittee as well. So that's kind of where we're headed. Really quick on the business assistance program, just wanted to give an update that we have now executed grant agreements with 4 of the 6 businesses that were awarded funds. We are still coordinating with 2 of those businesses on kind of what their grant agreement include or entail. But the rest are able to start submitting invoices for work that they're doing. So that's exciting. I know Kalima Market's grant agreement just got executed within like the last week, and Yameli's really excited to get going on that project. So she's been sending a lot of like thank yous, and she's really excited. And this year is her 10-year anniversary as a business at that location. And so they're hoping to kind of get these improvements on the way to help celebrate that 10-year anniversary in the area. So super exciting stuff there. Wanted to go over just some of the initial recommendations we got from that business assistance subcommittee. And I think related, just know that they're going to meet again July 30th, and that will kind of help bake some of the recommendations. So just want to make folks are generally comfortable with the direction that they're headed, because while you will meet again one more time before we're going to bring the program changes to Borough, we'll need to have them pretty baked and drafted with a recommendation from that subcommittee before you all do a final kind of view of them. So just want to make sure that you are comfortable with that subcommittee kind of making the detailed changes of where the program's going and get some initial feedback today. So we're looking at bringing that program changes to Borough August 21st for changes to that business assistance program policy. And then we would reopen the application period soon after that. And then score applications late October, early November. So some of the initial recommendations was just to develop a minimum grant award to recognize kind of just like the staff intensity of setting up a grant agreement with each individual business and some of the work that goes into that. So somewhere between $5,000 to $7,500. We're also looking at removing the kind of the separate tracks for the program and just having kind of one application process instead of having the design assistance track and the construction assistance track. Yeah.
Just a real quick question. I don't remember off the top of my head, but the applications that already came in for past, were any of them below 5,000 to 7,500?
Kind of good. Yeah, and we did, so all the applications, the request was over that amount, but some of the initial awards from CAB were below this amount, but the actual funding that got approved by Borough was within this range. That helps. We're all over the place.
Yeah.
And then we also want to develop sort of a policy around a max award amount that any one business or project could take advantage of with the program. Clarify how the match will be calculated within the program policy. We will come back with sort of an application support strategy for all applicants. I think we heard a lot of good feedback from Yanette, who came to the business assistance subcommittee to talk about her experience working with some of the Latino-owned business owners. But I think folks also want to see sort of like application assistance or office hours be available for all businesses that might be interested in applying. So kind of coming back with more of a strategy for how can we provide assistance for all applicants. There was also we identified some improvements around, like, especially when a tenant is applying, just making sure that there's a joint conversation with the owner and the tenant, and some updates to our owner authorization form to make sure the owner agrees to the design that's being proposed for improvements. clarity on kind of the ADA accessibility project requirements in both the policy and the application, that if an applicant identifies an ADA improvement, that if they're receiving public funds, they need to address that first. We're also looking at considering sort of an internal staff review of the applications that we receive, just for kind of initial city code compliance, and giving the applicant some feedback on the permits that would be necessary for them to receive in order to be compliant with our codes. And then we got some feedback from folks about the desire for an additional opportunity for CAB to review applications instead of it just all occurring in one meeting. Maybe it takes place over two, which we think that we can structure with the use of the business assistance subcommittee. We also had a pretty robust discussion, and I'll let the members of that subcommittee kind of chime in, but we had a pretty robust discussion around how to make changes to the scoring criteria, specifically around the catalytic potential scoring criteria. Folks kind of felt like it was a little subjective, and maybe we need to better define what we're really hoping to achieve with that catalytic definition. And there was a lot of discussion about sort of whether there should be a focus on, whatever the business identifies as the most needed improvement, whether it's internal or external, or whether in these early years where funding is limited, whether those funds should really be focused on external visually improvements that people can see. And I think the group generally landed on, a higher scoring towards projects that have that external visible component. The equitable outcomes, there wasn't a ton of proposed changes to that, but they did make recommendations to sort of get rid of the project need scoring criteria, because they felt like it was really subjective to evaluate one project's need over the other. And then also the near-term impact, especially since we're getting rid of the design assistance track, making sure that folks that are even in early stages of concept development don't get dinged for not having their project concept as far developed. That's kind of just the initial recommendations. It's a lot. I don't know if members of that subcommittee want to elaborate on any of that or the robust discussion that we had. I think so. Does anyone have questions or concerns around?
Sorry, your hand first. It sounds like there's a few. We'll start with Lisa, then John and Dale.
Wasn't there a requirement that you have to use the money within a certain amount of time? So like, isn't that already like near-term impact then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question was about the clarity regarding the ADA requirements. Is that specifically tied to the policy on what's awarded and how?
So if a business identifies accessibility as an issue, they are automatically required to improve ADA improvements if they receive government funds. So if it's just facade or window treatments or reinstalling a toilet, but if they say that we have issues with entryway access, if they're not ADA compliant, they have to do ADA compliance.
That's building code.
No, that's federal ADA law.
Right.
Yeah. Like, for example, Second Street, he assumed that his impact was greater than it was, but because he identified it as an issue, all he's going to have to do is just kind of flatten out those small brick steps.
Just to hit ADA requirements.
Yeah, and Allie's, I think, connecting him with the building department. It's going to be I would assume it's going to be a very reasonable remediation. So.
Yeah, he might have additional funds to address other issues. We don't quite know yet. We're still waiting for some more information from his contractor, but.
So does that mean like if somebody were to put in an application for a grant and they say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and Z happens to be an ADA requirement, then they have to do Z first before they do X and Y.
Yeah. And we just want to make that clear in the policy and the application process so that applicants know if I identify this, I have to address it. Let's just be more transparent about that. And that's just, it's federal ADA requirements around like every business is required to have what is it called? Like an ADA
improvement plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. And luckily for businesses though, it's a reasonable time frame and a reasonable amount. And so that's very broad definition legally. And I think what we heard from the last subcommittee, and I think Allie and I kind of touched on this, what was the individual who was our contractor for equitable access?
Yannette.
So Yannette kind of offered a suggestion that staff go and visit with these individuals prior to their official application submission. That way we can kind of walk them through like their site improvement plan, because Ally's a planner, finance, I think we could handle that if there's two of us. So we're not trying to create undue impacts on what you're trying to do. We just want to make sure that we're not giving money when it needs to be used for access.
Because no matter what the improvement is, you're still triggering.
Nope, it's accessibility. So entryway or bathroom.
Sure, but even if I'm doing a tenant improvement that requires planning review and my ADA is not compliant, I still have to put 25% of my budget into moving towards compliance.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, so it's just clarifying how that works in the application part.
Yeah, I think something too that came up during the discussion at this meeting was we're also having a larger conversation about incentives and how the incentives can inform kind of like site-specific incentives for each individual site for larger development projects where a reassessment is going to be triggered for a site. So think about this program as helping businesses where they're making improvements that aren't necessarily going to trigger the county assessor to come and reassess their property. Whereas that larger incentive policy could support projects where they're going to be doing a more substantial improvement where the tax assessor is going to come out and say, okay, you've now, done this addition or you've done this like larger investment and now your tax base or your tax rate for this property.
There's some threshold for that.
Yeah. So, and it kind of gets triggered through that building permit process. So certain building permits are going to trigger a reassessment of the property versus like smaller, like painting the front of the building or fixing the lighting is not going to necessitate the county assessor to come out and like reassess the property. Does that make sense?
That's already codified in the building permit tracks.
Yeah, that'll be outside this purview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think just helping focus like this program is going to be more for like smaller business improvements versus like major redevelopment of a site.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Two questions. I think you kind of answered one of them there, but your idea to have sort of staff review of these proposals are you talking about more like kind of like a formal CDD pre-application sort of meeting or just, staff that's in the room here looking at it?
It'd be more like a CDD review of the application. So what building permits?
Have building codes and fire and all of that. Okay.
Yeah, so they can kind of get a sense, like, and I think like some of them are a lot of like sign stuff. So maybe we get Kim to make sure like, is this generally compliant with the sign code, right? Or
It's a good idea. I like that.
just so they don't like then get an award for a project that is
You
then they
You can't do that.
Yeah, you can't do that. So just a little bit extra internal verification or, hey, like this is all generally in alignment with the code, but here's like one part of the project that you might need to like read this specific code section.
Is that something we can kind of add to the scoring criteria that it's been through this, that people have done that so that we know you can do your project?
I would
Yeah.
recommend no. The reason being is that should be staff's responsibility to present a fully fleshed out and approved application.
Yeah, I think the idea is that we do that review before it comes to CAD for review.
Okay.
So we've identified, and maybe it's part of like that application process of like, okay, these are the applications. This part of the project is feasible. And so we can kind of like add characterization of we're bringing you projects that we have passed this sort of internal, this is a feasible project, or we've asked the applicant to come back with a different proposal.
Okay. Part two of the question is just, I noticed the numbers are all stretched out. Is that we're not putting them on the scoring sheet or we're changing our scoring altogether?
We'll come back to that subcommittee with a revised scoring. I just, is 60 points make sense to have, if we get rid of the other two, do we want to still have it be like out of 50 points or out of, we hadn't had that internal discussion. So I just kind of took it off for right now.
So I had a few questions / observations. So I think like we really had hoped this was going to be straightforward and pretty easy and like low bar and nimble. And it's like, I think what we're finding after like a first round is that like, this is more complex, right? That it needs to have these sort of like internal like QC, basically, like quality control. I'm like, is this actually gonna like meet code, and what's their ADA situation? And like, you know what I mean? There's these, it's more layered. And so I think like two things for that committee to consider, I would say, is potentially increasing the minimum award, because there is so much more staff time that's required to deliver quality applications. Like that 5,000 seems really low to me, frankly. Like I think 10 or north of that might be worth considering, just so we're on balance with like the resources it takes to execute those things. So something to consider. And then I think like trying again, not to make this like an overly burdensome, cumbersome process, but having been at the table for other grant programs in other places, like perhaps considering like a pre-app, right? That's like a little more that streamlined, simplified front end piece that like kind of lives with staff. So like pre-app, so you can even know who do we need to sort of put into the next round for this more rigorous assessment that's going to require more additional staff time to do like kick the tires and like dot the T's and the I's. And so I don't know if that's helpful or not in the scenario. I don't want to create kind of like an extra step, but if that helps you on the back end, sort of streamline the number of applicants that really need that like more detailed look, and you're going to sites to visit, like those kinds of, I just wonder if there's like a role for that.
I feel like the initial, when we conceptualized the design assistance track, it was like, how can you help applicants navigate development code and potential possibilities? And because there is a good amount of energy that goes into that, and so having a small amount awarded for a private consultant to help navigate that made sense to me. But it sounds like now we're putting that on staff and then increasing the size of the project and creating a separate track to do that on staff time, which I think is also good. It just puts more burden on the city to. So as an applicant, if you're like, well, I don't even know if this is possible, can I do this? You're relying on the city to do a development code review, building code review, help you conceptualize a rendering of what you might do. So yeah, it does sound like more staff resources. Sounds harder.
I did sit down kind of with one of the architect teams that worked on one of the adaptive reuse projects that's going to come to the other subcommittee meeting and present. She was saying that their architecture, like their design firm, often does sort of like pre-scoping for projects to kind of get them to that level, right? Where they're like, they do a little review of the code, figure out what's possible, their vision, feasible, what's generally the budget. And that typically costs around $5,000. So I think if we want to keep that sort of design, if somebody wants to kind of just use this grant program to scope design and have that be eligible, you'd want to kind of keep that at the 5,000 to 7,500 range. So it kind of depends, I think if we're keeping that design concept development as eligible for the program and you want to help fund concept development for sites, you don't necessarily want to have that 10K max. You'd want to have it a little bit lower. But if you want it to be more for like projects that are going to move forward towards construction, then maybe you do want it to be a little bit higher. So we had kind of removed that design assistance, and we're not like set, like you could also decide to, keep like 20K or something, or 10K towards like design projects or concept development projects. But we don't know who's going to apply, right? And so it makes it a little bit challenging.
Right. I was just gonna say, I think the reason why we shifted away to consolidating was because it was confusing to applicants in the community. And there was a concern, like if I went down and got a grant for $5,000 to do a feasibility study in the pre-scoping, what if I couldn't actually then do it? Right? Because you're not guaranteed a second grant or a second award. So it was like, how do we allow that as a usable like process for the award, but then how do we make it more simple for the applicant, right? And so like consolidating and keeping it as something that would be eligible, but not having two awards to pick from. Because I think that's what we heard from the team that came and talked, was like, it was kind of confusing. Like, do I do this? Do I do this? I don't know. It's kind of a mashup. So I think that was the consolidation, but keeping the spirit of being able to do the kind of feasibility work is part of it.
Interesting. And that's why the 5,000, right? Like why there's a lower sort of minimum award to account for that kind of work. All right, other questions or thoughts about what the subcommittee, the changes and discussion that they're pondering and considering for the business assistance program? Thank you all for that work. Oh,
I would
Claire.
say one other thing, we heard a little bit about budget and trying to be thoughtful about like the out years of how much money we'd have and trying to be thoughtful about how the policy could utilize limited resources.
If there wasn't a pre-application process, like how would the city even identify who is going to apply and who to go and do the site visits for?
They would still apply. I
They
think
would-
what you're recommending is like a shorter application just to get started before that more
What we
in-depth one.
could do, like kind of what we've done for like MUPD applications, for example, is if you're going to submit an application, you're required to have a meeting with city staff before you apply, just so we can give you like a sense of what the intent of the program is. How do you ask questions about how should you structure your application, the application process itself, as sort of like an opportunity to guide the applicant towards like their ultimate application. So that's, I think, kind of generally what the pre-app intent would be. I'll just say, last year we opened the application and then I left on maternity leave. So there was like nobody really around to answer questions. So I think the experience will be much different for applicants this year, just because I won't be on maternity leave.
Yeah.
So I think keeping that in mind as well.
Okay.
Other questions, thoughts, comments, anything you want the committee to consider or ponder in their next round of discussions? Since just as a reminder, we've sort of empowered that group to really make that final call and decisions about how those changes are going to look. So now's the time to put it out there if you need to. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move on to the next agenda item.
Can I just add one more
No,
thing?
quick,
Because we have Counselor Perkins here as well. I think something that also came up in discussion was just getting more input from borough, specifically around the prioritization for childcare over more like catalyzing or like return on investment type of things and sort of the intent of TIP. And so I think that we'll likely send like a recommendation to borough with sort of like a cover letter describing like why last year we had allocated, like why CAP had allocated funds in the certain direction that they did. And while we recognize that childcare is a huge priority, like this is like also the intent of the TIP funds and that balancing that, but we want borough to weigh in specifically on that childcare prioritization because it's hard to navigate, right? It's like two policy goals. So that also came up in the subcommittee discussion.
Thoughts or questions on that? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And thanks again to the subcommittee members. Good work and a really important program. I think that we all really want to see succeed. And so appreciate all the thought and effort there. Look forward to hearing where the final discussion lands. We're going to move on to development incentives and MUPD update. There was like last night on this. And so it looks like Allie and Jonathan, some updates for us on that front.
Yeah, I think we'll keep this a little bit brief there. We can send out the council presentation from last night as well. Encourage you all to listen to that, but just wanted to provide a quick update on MUPD, that all the 4 applications, I kind of did this like really quickly last night, but all 4 applications are approved now. Penn Avenue was approved officially by the school district on Tuesday. The MUPD program will remain on pause indefinitely. But through this program, we're anticipating over 800 residential units by 2028. So assuming all projects continue to move forward. And then last night, I'll turn it over to Jonathan. We got some council and borough direction to pursue several new incentive programs to support both housing and economic development goals in the city. So council had directed staff to move forward with evaluating an ADU tax exemption, which is a 5-year tax exemption for ADUs that are going to be used for full-time rentals. And then a middle income housing tax exemption, which is a new, that it's been an existing exemption at the state level, but some changes are made to it to allow for the percentage of the tax exemption to be based on the percentage of the units that are provided at middle income levels. So if you're doing 20% of the units as middle income, you get a 20% tax exemption. And then borough.
Sorry, really quick, middle is 80 to 120.
Yeah. under 120, 120% AMI. And then Borough directed staff to pursue a site-specific policy formation for site-specific TIF areas and work with the City Council Stewardship Subcommittee on additional policy development of that. And that subcommittee will meet May 31st. We'll get additional feedback from AHAC, BDAB, and other groups to help inform that policy. And the idea is that that policy, that guide of that policy for the site specifics will also be applied within existing TIF areas. So, and I'll let Jonathan, if you have more to add on that.
If you have questions, I think she did a pretty good job summing that up.
But this will sort of replace the development assistance program for the core area. And the idea would be an individual site within an existing TIF district, or a site outside of a TIF district could become its own TIF district for that parcel. And then we can provide sort of tax rebates to that development based on the taxes that they're going to generate.
Nice work.
This is like the council liaison to AHAC and BDAB, and I'm on the stewardship subcommittee, so if you want to talk about it.
Action that's happening for housing, we need to do that, and that's really cool. Have site-specific policy, that's freaking rad.
The site specifics, do they count against the city's overall 15% max?
Yes. So, right now we are at 4.3% for AV and 6.7%. No, reverse that. 4.3% for land mass, 6.7% for AV. So we are well below the 15%. We are looking at some policy changes for Juniper Ridge, which will help potentially give us some more flexibility with the current AV. So, but we're also intending to use this for economic development too, which is, we just had.
Did you mean Murphy or Juniper?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Murphy's Crossing, my bad. No, we are not doing.
Just to translate that for those who don't know everything about urban renewal policy, there's a statutory limit on how much geographic area and assessed value of a city's total assessed value of property can be within an urban renewal or TIF area, and it's 15% total of the city's geographic area, so an acreage.
Thank you.
And then 50% of the city's total assessed value can be in a TIF area. So we are nowhere near the statutory limits for that on either of those.
Thank you.
I guess, yeah.
So
Thoughts.
are these micro TIFs, is this a change in state law or something that's allowing this? Has this always been there?
Yes, other communities in Oregon have used it. We are just using the tools and our capability to limit uncertainty for our developers.
So Wilsonville uses this as an economic development tool, almost like an enterprise zone. Their program's called WIN. I don't remember what Wilson.
No investment now. We're not going to come up with weird.
And then
Another acronym in there.
Hillsborough.
No, Salem is using their site-specific tips for housing.
Does each one of these have to go through to talk to all the taxing districts?
So it's a 45-day consultant confirm. It follows the same process as an urban renewal establishment. But the only decision makers are Borough Planning Commission and City Council.
And just for taxing districts in the room, we'll be reaching out to taxing districts like in June or July about these incentives.
Yeah, the next step is just identifying policy criteria. So I mean, we are far from any kind of plan program launch. So
Just a question, right? So MUFD, 4 projects, 800 units, right? I'd say that's a pretty significant win in terms of delivering housing a relatively quick timeline, right? At least providing like a pathway for those projects to roll forth. So was there any kind of discussion about what worked with that tool and what didn't, and sort of like the threads of that connect to this sort of updated policy? Because I think we all know that the rollout for Jack Straw was unfortunate, but I think like that program arguably did exactly what we needed it to do. And so when you look at something like that, for me, it looks like there's a lot of success stories to be derived or lessons learned from that. So just curious how that informed the thinking for the revision here.
I mean, that's a great question. So last night's presentation, so maybe I can have Ally send out the presentation to you all. If you have questions, you can, or I can briefly join and just briefly go through.
Yeah, you should be able to share your Sure.
Yeah, I'll just speak to it. The way that we went about doing this, so in January, city council / borough directed staff to do a strategic assessment of all of our incentives. And what that looked like was we did a 4-phased approach. We met with 5 housing developers. Ali and I met with a couple of affordable housing, workforce housing. We got feedback from Mufti. She did a economic development survey. And then we reviewed financial pro formas of about 8. So it was the 4 Mufti applications, and there were 4 additional potential developments that are kind of on the fence here in Bend. The smallest one was a quadplex within the core area, and the largest one was 186 units right outside of the core area. And then we did an incentive review, and one of the focuses was on Mufti, and we identified a couple of challenges. For example, it's not scalable to small development. It just doesn't pencil for the quadplex because of the key requirements that were adopted. So for example, the 10% open space coupled with the 5% setbacks and right-of-way dedications in the Bend Development Code, you just shrunk really small parcels. And so council was like, we want this program to be equitable to every developer. And so we scaled it down as far as we could go. We couldn't do an ADU, hence why housing came back with their own ADU policy. We couldn't do anything smaller than a quadplex. So, and then the financial impacts, we've kind of spoke to this with this group. It's great that we're getting 800 units, right? So I'm not disparaging that at all, but being the TIF purveyor of trying to implement everyone's ideas and programs, the way that property tax exemptions work in Oregon is it's not like it's an exemption. They actually removed the AV off the tax rolls for that amount of time. That AV is removed, so therefore we can't bond against it from the TIF. So in addition to no increment being generated from the TIF that's being developed, is we also can't use those for 3 projects to bond against or to add that to our revenue rolls. So, and then the other criteria that we looked at was if affordability is a key requirement of council, are additional program requirements like LEED certification, green building energy, is that still paramount? Because we've spoken to a couple of developers that some of the LEED requirements increase rent rates by up to 16%. So in the long run, it's a great thing for the community. It lowers the impacts to our electrical grid. It's good for the building's life and longevity and assessed value and property value. But if you're trying to make an impact tomorrow in terms of rent affordability, is that the route to go? And that's still a policy conversation that we're going to be bringing to subcommittee. It's like, because you got to balance policy trade-offs. You know, you got to have appropriate climate friendly approaches, but you're trying to balance affordability. So yeah, Mufti did what it was intended to do. It will deliver 800 units by 2028. So it's just, and then the other issue was outside volatility to the developer. 2 applications went through with one process and 2 went through a different one. So we want to make it equitable to everybody and stable.
And we're on certainty to the development community.
Can't take the risk.
Apply for the program and qualify for the criteria.
Jonathan, just a quick question. You said the 10% open space requirement, but I'm confused because I think that applied to small lots and it was a public benefit people could choose. But for small developments, that's not a threshold from the city code, right? For less than 10 acres, correct? For the 10% open space, because you said that was a detriment to the small lots, but I didn't think they were required per your code to provide.
Just if they were wanting to choose that.
Oh, is it?
Like,
but they probably wouldn't.
They probably
wouldn't. The size of their lot. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yeah, and the reason that it was a hindrance to smaller developers is, for example, in the priority public benefits, 60% AMI or 80% AMI, less for the unit sale, or the affordable 30% of middle income at 10 years at 120%. We ran the numbers that new building market rates are about $2,900, especially the quadplex that we looked at. And this, we're basing it off the performance that we received willingly. it doesn't pencil for them because it's a town, right? And then the high energy standards was kind of the offset. And so, but that's going to be a policy decision that we continue to bring to council. But the open space coupled with the 5% right of way dedication setbacks, it was like, why is that an option or an additional priority or public benefit that a quadplex would assume? So it's just like tailoring some of the program requirements that is equitable for both the large developer and the small developer instead of the pick and choosing type approach.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Other questions or comments on this part of the agenda? And thank you, Ally, for sending around the presentation from last night. If folks are interested to dig into that a little bit more.
I'll send it out.
Really appreciate that description, Jonathan. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna keep rolling. Next, we have Ben Parks and Rec. Rachel is here with us to talk through the comprehensive plan update. Sarah is gonna join as well. Okay, great. All right, well, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
There's like mics all around, so I do this since you.
Here, do you want my chair and I'll bump down? Of course. Yeah.
I can't move, so.
You're anchoring, you're anchored.
Arrow for you.
It's,
But I think.
I'm driving it.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
driving, okay.
You just.
But
tell
thank
me what to
you.
do.
Okay, Ally will be our vet.
I'm Sarah Anselman. I'm also a planner at the Park District. I work alongside Rachel. So I've been the project manager for our midterm comprehensive plan update. So we're gonna just kind of give you a high level overview of the midterm update with a focus on our core area projects. So the comprehensive plan is the district's main guiding plan. It is basically the framework for district operations, as well as policy and infrastructure investment. The 2018 plan, which is our current plan, was developed as a living document that requires a midterm update. So that's where we are now. And we'll do a full rework of the plan in about 5 years or so. Since this is just a midterm update, we're not even necessarily calling it an update internally, just to sort of emphasize how small it is. We call it a check-in. We just don't, usually when there's an update, it's a full rework. So we call it check-in. So I might use that update and check-in interchangeably. So since it's very small, there's no changes to policy, level of service targets, how we calculate walk sheds, anything like that. Our primary public outreach on this has been our community needs survey. And of course, any board meeting where we have presented components of the plan so far. And we have collaborated with city and county planners as well as transportation engineers. So the update focuses on a few key areas, and we'll be updating our demographic data, primarily looking at population. Population has increased pretty significantly since 2018 already, and that affects our level of service. So we, it's a snapshot in time when we do this, but it was in 2018 as well. So we will capture that, and then I'll talk about level of service a little bit more, just so you have a better understanding of how population affects that. We're also updating our park search area map and our trails plan map. And I'll talk more about the park search area map on a later slide and specifically how it impacts the core area. We're also updating our unmet needs analysis, and that's where the community survey comes in. If you're not familiar with the survey, it went out last fall. We asked a lot of questions on the survey, but the part that we use for our unmet needs analysis is there's a a list of needs or basically park and rec type amenities. And the survey asks if you have a need for a specific amenity, like do you have a need for a tennis court or for indoor fitness classes? And if you check yes,
Pickleball, yeah, for sport in America.
yep, has increased. We then ask how well your need is met. So you can rate it on a scale, basically 0 to 100. So all of that data then gets plugged into a methodology that the district has used since 2004 that then determines the priority level of each need. So they're categorized as highest, high, moderate, and low need. And then each of those priority levels has a corresponding target. So for example, the highest needs, we want 80% of people to say that their need is met. So all of that is the unmet needs analysis. And then last, we're updating our project list. They're also, all the projects, they're also prioritized as high, medium, and low. And for that, we use some established criteria to score all the projects and then we rank them. So the current plan has 99 projects and we're either done or in progress with about half of the plan, the original 99 projects. So we evaluated the remaining projects, we added new ones, and they come from a variety of sources, like even our asset management plans. Not all the projects are fun, like regrouping. Rachel's river habitat restoration plan?
River access and habitat restoration plan.
We just,
I can't remember that.
I know. The river plan had a lot of projects, some more river access and restoration projects on the list. Parks, rich areas, crossings, kind of runs the gamut. So now we're at just over 100, I think 105. And we don't expect by the next full update that we'll have all of them done or even half of them necessarily in progress, but it gives us a lot to choose from and it's a good starting point for the next plan. So I'm gonna let Rachel talk now about why we need parks in the core area.
Sarah, can I ask a question before, newbie question? So 2018 plan is for how long?
10 years.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm actually just gonna provide a little bit more history and actually foreshadow what Allie's gonna talk about next, so to save some time here. So I knew we were gonna be short for time. As you all know, Allie just sent out updated performance metrics and we've worked with city staff over the last couple of years to fine tune this metric with regards to the availability of parks, open space, plazas, et cetera, within the core area. And, we used a metric similar to what Sarah spoke to, which she'll explain a little bit more, but a watershed analysis. And ideally, we're looking for the percentage of core area residents that are within a half-mile watershed of publicly accessible park, plaza, open space, and natural area. And our colleague Henry created this cool heat map. You can see on the map, so that more significant housing is in the yellow and red areas. And then
existing housing, not permitted.
Does it show the 800 units forthcoming after shows the parks in green, and then you see the hashes, which are the walk sheds. So again, the details, but as you can see clearly on this map, so I'll point to it, like sometimes the walk sheds don't cross over certain barriers, right? So if you think about 3rd Street, we've got barrier streets where you probably all have heard about like the 8 to 80 concept, right? If you can't send your 8-year-old across 3rd Street, we call that a barrier street, right? So it means you might be within that half mile, but we don't expect you necessarily to be able to easily access that park because of those barrier streets. So that's how we use our walk sheds. And so as part of this, we've worked with staff to identify a goal of having 100% of the core area residential units within a park walk shed by the time the plan sunsets, so in 2051. And right now we just updated this analysis, which hasn't changed much from the year before because the housing units really haven't changed. So 17.6% of core area residential units are within that walk shed. So we have a lot of opportunities to increase availability of parks and open spaces within the core area. And then the next slide just goes to a little bit more history. Sarah talked about the 99 projects in the comp plan, right? Only one of them really speaks specifically to the core area. And this is this project, which is a low priority project, talking about, it's called Parkland Central District, but it's a little bit broader, talking about, parkland acquisition and development of, a plaza or similar within the core area. And I'll say, our plan was, Sarah mentioned, was adopted in 2018, right? And core area report was 2019. So staff at the time was talking to city staff, BPRD staff, but we didn't know what was going to come out in the core area report. So that is why this is kind of so nebulous. And so we have a great opportunity here with the midterm check-in update to be more specific and identify, where we might want park search areas, which I'll turn back to Sarah to kind of walk through some of the proposed enhancements, perhaps you will, within the updates to the plan.
Yeah, so this is our current park search area map that we're proposing with this update. But first, I'm gonna go over level of service a little bit because that ties into the park search areas. So I mentioned that population affects level of service. Because level of service is a measurement based on the acres of park per person or miles of trail per person. So we have targets. So for neighborhood and community parks, the target is 7.85 acres per 1,000 residents. For regional parks, it's 10 acres per 1,000. And for trails, it's 1 mile per 1,000 residents. So if population goes up and we're not keeping track, it gets challenging. So we actually check in every year to see where we're at. But it's not perfect. It's also not area specific. It's district wide. So it's not like we need 7.85 acres of park in the core area because there's going to be 1,000 people. It's all of the parkland cumulatively, which doesn't necessarily put everyone within reach of a park. So we also use a park search area map. And this was developed because the comprehensive plan also identifies the importance of having a park within a half-mile walk of as many residents as possible. So to determine that, we use the watershed analysis. And if you're not familiar on how we do that, it's basically GIS data creates a half-mile radius around the park property, and it's clipped anywhere, that radius is clipped anywhere where there's a barrier, like a major street or parkway or railroad tracks. So then we take the area outside of that watershed and we further evaluate it, make sure it's like residential or it's going to have residential. And then if it meets, so some of that, it's not formal criteria, but we just look at it all individually and determine if this should be a park search area. And then those boundaries are created based on barriers. So sometimes they are larger than a half acre and you don't know that you're getting a park right in the middle, but sort of the best tool we have at least directs parks to a general area where we know there's a need or that there will be a need. So with this update, we added 6 new park search areas. They are primarily in commercial and mixed use zones that are proposed to develop at a higher density of residential uses. It's basically the climate friendly areas. So there's 2 in the core area, which I'll talk about more next. And then there's 2 in the proposed climate friendly areas on Highway 20 near Costco and car dealerships. And we also added one for the Stevens Road Tract to account for that UGB expansion area. And then we added one near the hospital on the east side of Purcell. That area is developing with medium to high residential. And given those densities, we felt that some open space would be appropriate there.
Just really quick, what's the difference between the blue and the orange?
Oh, sorry. The blue are crossing improvement areas. Those are areas where we don't think we can get parkland, but there is a park nearby. So if we were to provide some sort of enhanced crossing, then people would have a safer access to an existing or what we think will be a future park.
Okay, thank you.
We also have crossings, just specific crossings. Those are more in collaboration with the city.
Did you guys talk to the Envision Bend folks in this outreach?
We have not with this outreach. We did, Henry, our colleague, was part of the meetings with Envision Bend. I don't know his exact role.
He was on some of the subcommittees and our colleague Kelsey was also on some of the subcommittees as well. I think Henry was on the planning and transportation related subcommittees. I'm not sure about Kelsey, but we're engaged with the planning and the discussion, like, for example, for the Drake to Jennifer connection, which is also something the city is.
Since it came to mind, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great point.
Yeah, Henry actually is the one that creates the maps and does the analysis, so a lot of probably what he knows from that is in his head when he creates these and picks crossing areas, and he also works closely with the city on like the neighborhood street safety program to determine crossing locations. So looking more closely at the core area, we added 2 park search areas. As Rachel said, there used to be a project that just sort of encompassed generally the core area. Since we have more information, we've added park search areas to some of the other climate friendly areas. We changed this from a project to 2 park search areas to be consistent. So one will be north of Greenwood and one south. And even though we call these a park search area, we know it may not necessarily be a typical park. It might take more of an urban form like a plaza or a linear park. So each of these projects then is also, each park search area is on our project list. So each project gets a project description. So I worked with Rachel and Allie to write project descriptions specifically for these new park search areas. And I'll just mention that there's really no time for completing these park search areas. We don't know, exactly where things are going to develop or when they're going to develop. But we are actively working with the city to explore opportunities for collaboration or for partnership in the core area. Some of it might also just be opportunistic, like the majority of our acquisitions are. So it could also be a combination of both.
To that point, none of our park search areas have time frame associated with them, correct? None of our projects necessarily have time frames associated with them. There's, as we both mentioned, there's priority levels, but sometimes it's just opportunistic whereby some developers developing something where we can partner with them. So.
Do you know where these are landing in high, medium?
Both high.
Yeah.
I checked right before I came. Yeah. Yep, they're high. Some of our criteria is density and population base, plus the ability for partnership. So they score high in that level, but high doesn't mean yet first necessarily. There's a lot of high priority projects. And so next, I'm currently working on the draft, and the tentative plan is to bring the draft to our board at our first meeting in September. I was shooting for earlier, but all of our August meetings are canceled, so you can get an extended timeline.
Likes to play, I guess.
So at the board meeting, when we present the draft, there's the opportunity for public comment. And then depending on comments from the public and feedback from our board, we're still shooting for adoption this fall. And then this summer, we will also start working on our SDC eligible project list. And we'll get a start on that since we already developed a project list. I think starting this next fiscal year, we can officially start. And then the plan is to adopt the SDC project list shortly after the plan update is adopted. So with that, are there any questions?
I just have a question. So for the SDC project list, those are essentially going to be the highest priority projects. Is that a fair line to draw?
SDC eligible projects can only, I don't know if I'm word this quite right, only be for projects that are serving growth. So like a lot of crossing projects, so there's some trail projects that aren't necessarily associated with growth, but there's a very small trail project that basically is a social trail that already exists in a neighborhood. People just keep cutting through. So we thought, why not just formalize this, make sure the grades are right, take ownership so it's maintained. So like that couldn't be an SDC eligible project. New parks generally are, even in existing areas but as density increases, that new park serves increased density.
Question. What are the laws around eminent domain in the BCD area? For like parks, for a park to take a lot that is not being used maybe, or
Yeah,
an
as a public
easier
agency,
grab?
we can
Okay.
use condemnation. We never have.
Hmm.
I don't know that we will for a park, but it is an option for us.
Maybe if there's a lot that looks like they would be okay passing.
Yeah, you still have to pay market value.
Sure.
for it and negotiate, and it's a very expensive process
Sure.
to get the right, basically, we're already working with a consultant that does it. I'm working with them just to purchase land. I'm not using them for condemnation, but they are expensive. The city uses them for their condemnation projects. The appraisals have to follow certain rules. They are more than twice the price of a typical appraisal. So if we did it, it would be our very last resort. I don't for a park, if our board would ever approve it, but.
Other questions for Sarah or Rachel?
Or possibly the ability to, I know some families have donated land to the city. Is there a way you could like outreach to the area for, because people may be paying a lot to maintain the land, it might be easier to just
Yeah,
donate it or.
probably once we know more, we do just straight up approach property owners.
Yeah.
We have had land donated to the park district. That's part of how we do acquisition, is we rely somewhat on donation. Within certain parameters, we do buy a lot of land and you know, land prices are incredibly expensive. So donation is obviously preferred, but if people aren't interested in donating and it's been determined we really need a park there, we do pay market price for it. So combination.
Oh yeah, I'm curious. This is John. Do you guys have a rule about purchasing land that might have a building on it that has asbestos or lead paint? Like, is that a property that you guys would be interested in, or would you avoid that like the plague?
I actually just worked on an acquisition that has a building that we know has lead paint, and I think given the age of the building, when we had the environmental assessment, they just said, just assume there's asbestos when we take it down. So we just act accordingly with the proper precautions in place. What we don't want are properties with buildings that are worth money. They just cost too much, so basically has to be in tear down or close to condition of not feeling bad about demolishing.
Or usable as is for indoor use.
I mean, or
Like Costco for 500
Yeah.
pickleball courts or something.
suggest that.
Yeah.
Someone actually told us the price too and said, well, you can afford that. Purchasing buildings for use is also not out of the question. We're in contract with the city to the Boyd Acre Shop location for park services building. So park boring as far as the community's involved, they get to go participate in, but yeah, we do buy buildings for our own use.
I had one question just about, because there's so many park search areas, and so you mentioned that both the ones in the core area are kind of in the high category. Is that the highest priority category?
Yeah.
And then I'm curious, like in this process, right? So you mentioned public comment, like will public input comments, is it anticipated that that shifts what the like highest priority search areas are?
No, we already presented that to our board,
Okay.
the priority levels, so we didn't receive any public comment. I also have an email list. You can go to district's website and sign up to be on the email list for updates on the comp plan, and I did send that out, and I don't think I got any comments on priority level. I think I just heard about maybe why basketball courts aren't high priority and disc golf.
What comments on volleyball court?
Yeah.
And the recent hot topic.
Yeah.
Well, they took out those sweet ones down by the old mill for now.
And that's where the community needs assessment. As somebody talks to a lot of people, who want lots of different things all over town, is really informative because it's statistically valid survey. And so it's one of our many data points, right? So like this plan update, like all of our plan updates is, data and community informed. And unfortunately, things like sand volleyball were really kind of showing that their need was met, and it was actually exceeded for sand volleyball is my recollection. And so then it's hard really to substantiate using taxpayer money to support build out of more facilities where we're not seeing based upon the data that we have. Not saying that, again, it depends on who takes the statistically valid survey, but like that data is not showing a strong need. But then we do have a lot of community members. There was a meeting I was presenting at, and I think we had like 5-6 people presenting saying we needed sand volleyball courts. So, it's interesting to see where we get all the different data from, and we're actually, with our next fiscal year, we're going to be getting some AI data, which will help us understand really how some target facilities are being used. Because we do we've done river surveys and stuff, but that's only like a snapshot in time, and it takes a lot of staff time. And so this will be, it's not perfect data, but it's pretty good. It's using, phone data. And so that'll really help inform some of this planning as well.
That's great.
For those low priority projects, they're usually low priority if they're not, they have a smaller percentage of the population that says they have a need for that. We do have an avenue for building pickleball courts is a big one we've built through community sponsored projects, as we call them, where a group comes together and fundraises, and the district will provide the land if we have it. And Rachel actually runs that program.
Partnerships are awesome.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to see CFEC up here, right? Which I think, that's a study that we're kicking off, right? To really start to dig into the Drake to Juniper connection and like what that means for this core area. So that's going to be kind of an interesting point of connection, I think, to kind of keep rolling with parks. So, well, great. Well, I think we need to move on to performance metrics unless anyone else has a burning question that they want to ask or put in the room. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it, Sarah and Rachel. And we're going to move on to core area performance metrics. Allie sent out sort of a first version and then an updated version. I think folks have the updated version that was passed around prior to the start of the meeting. I know that's available online for folks. So Allie, you're going to walk us through what we're seeing here for some of those key metrics that we're tracking.
The updated version that you handed out incorporates what was in that memo.
So there's the version dated May 13th, which is also one we printed out. That's the only version that exists today. We added a memo. We sent out a memo this morning with proposed changes to this version, which we have not yet made. So we want to get your input today, and then if you agree to those proposed changes that we've already identified as staff and from initial feedback, plus any changes you would like to see after reviewing this today, we'll incorporate that into a final version that would come back to you at your next meeting. So sorry, let me take a couple little steps. So I'll share this draft. So this year, we've kind of worked on the performance metrics for, I think, 2 years or something now, but this year we tried to kind of put the data into a more visual format now that we've collected like a couple years worth of data to help you see trends over time. For those that are kind of new to the board, the performance metrics are organized by the guiding principles identified in the core area tax increment finance plan. So I'm creating a place where you can live, work, and play, that this becomes a walkable area with a balanced transportation system. I won't list all, there's 7 of them, 8 of them, but you kind of get the sense of how they're organized. So I'll quickly kind of go through the metrics and try to highlight some of the changes that we've identified, but the first metric is really around tracking net new residential units. I think in previous years, we've discussed that we've done a lot of data cleanup as a city. We have a pretty robust office of performance management now that tracks all this data. And we worked with them in 2020, they did an audit of mobile home units, which there was actually a lot of mobile home units in the district that kind of either moved on or were reconverted to different uses. And so that year in particular, we did a data cleanup with the county on mobile home units. And so you saw like a significant drop in units, but that wasn't necessarily because there was actually a significant drop in units that year. It was because we did a data cleanup. Same thing, there's a lot of single family dwellings in the area that are used for commercial buildings, particularly in that East downtown area. They might be like a medical office or, yada, yada. And so we did an audit kind of, I think it was in 2021, where we looked at like which ones of these are actually being used as businesses versus residents. And so we also saw sort of like a dip in some of the residential units. So moving forward, we're using the 2022 data as sort of our baseline of like where we started and tracking. Our goal is to have 608 total housing units in the core area by 2028, and that's based on our housing needs analysis from 2016. So I think keeping in mind that target for our housing need will also be shifting. So this is a very like live tracking mechanism for our goals. But as time goes on and climate friendly areas require that the cities provide 30% of their existing and future housing need within climate friendly areas, we anticipate that the core area housing targets for our housing needs analysis will also increase. So it's not going to go any lower. This is kind of the general point, that the goal is to have 608 total housing units by 2028 and 2,042 total units in the core area by 2040. And again, those targets will probably increase over time as we start to create a growth plan for, then 2050. Right now we're at 222 units. We lost one single family detached unit. I can't remember kind of the details around that. There are significant units that are in the pipeline though. And so even though we're kind of seeing like this slow decline of net new units in the district, wanted to kind of show you like where we're headed. So today, or at the end of 2023, we had 222 existing units in the district. The Jackstraw project will be adding 312 units. The Everpine phase 1 of the Timber Yards master plan, another 250 units, and then Platform, another 199 units. So we're on track to meet that 607 unit goal by 2028. So kind of wanted to give like a glimmer of hope, even though the current trend is going down. I also saw there's like I don't know if they're like townhomes that are under construction over between like 3rd and 4th Street near Olney. That'll be like 2 new units in the district that are, in progress. So there's a couple of small projects also on the way, and a couple of ADUs I think are also under construction this year. So I think 2024 we'll see some net new, and then Jackstraw is anticipated to come online fall of 2025. So I think 2025 we'll see kind of a huge delivery of units to the market. Creating a place where you can live, work, and play. Business and employee data has been a little interesting since the pandemic. So you'll notice that we had kind of a lot more average employment, as well as job sites were kind of lower than they are today. The average employment was higher in 2019 in the core area. And in 2020, we saw kind of a dip in employment in particular, but not necessarily job sites. We've slowly kind of seen the job sites continue to like go up or stagnate, whereas average employment has gone down. We've also seen some like larger businesses that are expanding, like that are kind of growing out of their core area locations. So Tomco Electric is an example of that, where they're going to be relocating their facilities to the core or to Juniper Ridge. So these are all kind of employment trends that are feeding into this, but I think just recognize that 2020 was a really odd year for business. For everyone, a lot of folks had to, lay off a lot of employees temporarily or permanently. So we saw a drop in both number of employees and job sites. The areas continue to see some annual reductions. And we won't have 2023 data available until October of this year. So that's why it's not shown, but I think that will help us kind of see where employment is headed. I did sort of compare this to citywide trends, and it was kind of consistent, like average employee kind of went down and has slowly come back up to slightly below 2019 levels, whereas like job sites has kind of continued to go up as a city. So it's slightly different, but generally the same as citywide data. You already saw this map, but we have a goal of kind of percentage of core area residents within a half-mile watershed of a publicly accessible park. So we coordinate with the park district to provide this data, one edit that we did, thank you, Rachel, for finding this, was that Kiwanis Park is actually what serves this walk shed, not the Vincenta Stadium. I just like saw the largest park and put that in there, but that's corrected. So thank you for your review. But this is kind of a cool map just to show kind of the heat map of residents. The park district gets this data from the city. We have sort of where all of our residential units are. And we provided that to the park district to overlay with their walk shed areas. This is kind of like a joint collaborative map effort.
Nice.
One of our goals is that the area is, walkable area with a balanced transportation system. We coordinated with Eric Lint from COIC or CET on transit data. Just something to keep in mind is that in 2022, they switched software systems. And so the historical data that we had for 2022, that stop boardings was extremely high, and we had an error. And so in the time being, we're just omitting that data set. And so the 2022 data shows sort of like total boardings that are happening in the court area is lower, but that's just because we don't have the correct data information, but you can kind of see the general trends of, we see a lot of boardings happening at Hawthorne Station. There was, again, similar to, employment, we saw a big reduction in 2020 in transit ridership. And it's slowly been kind of making its way back. So we use 2020 as sort of our start date for setting our targets. The goal is to increase transit boardings and alightings, which are transit exits, by 3% every 5 years. Something just when we look at the data, some of the stops within the core area that have the highest amount of boardings is 3rd Street at Wagner Mall. So the most people are entering transit from 3rd Street and Wagner Mall within the core area, as well as 3rd Street and DeKalb Avenue over by El Sancho East Side. And then the stops that have the highest exits or people kind of coming into the core area is at Franklin Avenue and 2nd Street, and then Greenwood Avenue and 6th Street, as well as Hawthorne, obviously. We also have some data on inner city travel. So about 20% of the folks kind of coming to Hawthorne Station are using inner city buses. And Eric, I don't know if you want to share or elaborate on anything while you're here, if you're still here.
Yeah. That was a great recap. Yeah, unfortunately, we switched our passenger counting systems in 2022, and it'll take some work to recover that data. But this gives kind of the general idea that, pandemic, we fell off a cliff with ridership, but things are picking up again.
Thanks, Eric. We also have a goal of just kind of capital projects within the core area. So just kind of an update on some of the active sort of east-west projects that are happening in the district, and also one north-south at Ani Street extension project. Study for that project we're expected to finalize that study I think in the next month. It'll be posted to the webpage, but at the end of 2023, we've spent a very small amount just on the study. And then that project is kind of programmed to happen probably 2027, 2028. Midtown connections and streetscaping. We had spent other funds that kind of weren't core funds on the feasibility study, and that project, didn't complete until 2023. So not a ton was spent on these, but we've spent a little bit on Franklin for some stormwater stuff, and then you'll kind of see just where these projects are at in their current status. So Greenwood is now in design. 2nd Street and Franklin are moving to design, and Hawthorne is sort of still in the concept development phase before we hand it over to ODOT for design. Olney Avenue pedestrian bicycle improvements is also in design. A lot of work has been done on the design this year, so I think at the end of 2024, you'll see an increase in the amount of budget that's been spent on Olney. Wilson Avenue, the open house or the ribbon cutting for Wilson Avenue corridor improvements is May 21st. So, but at the end of 2023, when we kind of did a snapshot of where we're at, we had spent 81% of the project budget on Wilson, but that project's now at its cutting stage.
Is there any TIF money involved in that budget?
No, not for Wilson. It's all the GEO bond. And same thing with Olney. That is all GEO bond funded.
I'm done on schedule, right? Wilson?
I don't know. I think so. I don't.
Wilson?
Yeah, I'd have to ask Sinclair.
This one?
May 21st is the ribbon cutting. I don't know what the targeted
Yeah.
schedule was. Yeah, we could add something to this about which projects are funded with core area funds. I think that would be helpful.
That's a good idea.
It's just Midtown and Second, right?
And Franklin.
Yeah, Midtown.
Yeah, all of Midtown, basically.
I have a question about the performance metrics in general. Are these like what we already agreed upon would be our performance metrics and we're just updating them? And are we going to talk about like if this should be them still, or is it just to update on like what
This,
we've already agreed?
yeah, we kind of have already like decided what the performance metrics are in previous years, and so now we're just giving you the 2023 data for them.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's growth management's doing like a big project to do performance metrics for CFA implementation. And I think after they finish that process next year, maybe we reevaluate like what metrics we continue to track or update to be more consistent with that process.
Yeah, because
Pretty similar.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that they'll have to do like
They have to track like safe crossings, which we don't have data for today. And there's a couple other things. So they're going to be working a lot over the next year with ODOT and our Office of Performance Management on climate friendly area performance metrics. And I think at that time, then we could like reevaluate what our core area performance metrics are.
yeah. Also like the completeness of the sidewalk network and the bike network in CFA areas also, which because this performance one is like it only talks about transit, but there's many other aspects of transportation.
Yeah, and I think the last 2 years we had like pretty robust discussions about just like data capacity.
Yeah.
So I think part of that performance metric process for the CFA areas will help build internal capacity to help report on more metrics.
Yeah, and I think Ally hasn't mentioned it yet, and I think everyone is aware of this, but I think it merits a repeat here, is that the amount of time and energy and effort it takes to corral all of this data and to present it every year is significant. And so data is important. We definitely want to be tracking our outcomes. And so I think we just want to be cognizant, especially when it's particularly like the CFEC and climate friendly area piece, right? Understanding that there's data that is being asked for that we don't necessarily collect or have yet. And so it needs to be something that I think takes into account staff capacity, right? And so I think what you see here in these metrics, a lot of what we talked about was like, what's a proxy? Like, what's a decent proxy that can tell us generally how some of these things are going, right? And is that like kind of good enough based on what we currently have available to us, knowing that if we want other different better, there's some trade-offs there. So yeah, just I think worth noting here as we continue to move through it.
Thank you.
One of the other things that we track is just the core area project report, which was adopted in 2020, identified sort of follow-up actions to consider for the core area. So the target here is that we complete those actions by any relevant actions. Some of the actions may not always stay relevant, but that we complete those by 2025. So we've completed approximately 7 of those, with another 8 that are in progress. And we kind of provided updates or additional context about all of those different recommendations. And
we skip one?
The mode.
Oh yeah, sorry, mode split. This is like one of those ones that's probably like the most helpful metric. And like sometimes the permanent counters go out of commission. And so I would say like this one is not a perfect science, and just like take this one with a grain of salt, but we have permanent counters on Franklin Avenue. I think we have a longer term goal to add permanent counters to Greenwood and Hawthorne long term to help like measure this a little bit better. But right now we only have permanent counters on Franklin Avenue, and we collect pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle traffic counts. In 2023, one of the sides of the pedestrian and the bicycle count was like out of commission. And so to do the metric for 2023, I took whatever the south side, whether it was the south side or the north side, and looked at historical trends for the differences between the side and applied it to 2023 to kind of create what the expectation for ped bike trips were. But we saw a decrease in overall ped bike trips. I did not do a full data cleanup to look at like, was there a day where, something went wrong and it was tracking like a 0? So that could also be impacting the averages. So I just,
Well, they percentage of mode split. So it could be am I correct in thinking that it could be that car trips went up and bike trips went up, but the percentage,
Yeah, the percentage of split went
not
down.
a decrease in trips, but because car trips have definitely gone up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I mean, Corey and I kind of talked about like conditions in Franklin have also like shifted and so you might have like less high schoolers that are walking from Bend High to downtown or
It stopped. Yeah.
Yeah, the tunnels are in a pretty deteriorated condition, and I think that might account for sort of the dip in some way.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
fortunately, we are making significant investments to Franklin in the next, 2 to 3 years. So hopefully we see that number after that time go up.
Oh, yeah, the core improvement is a big time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I talked about the plan actions.
Yep.
We also kind of report on project spending by project category. One recommendation in sort of the proposed changes is to add essentially like a donut hole that shows like your programmed CIP. So kind of the $10 million that are programmed, adding that. So you see like actual spending, program spending, and then targeted spending. And this is just based on, we're not like bound to spending dollars to this like allocation, but when we established the plan, our advisory board that helped establish the career plan had set sort of like targets for spending between the different project categories. It was anticipated that in the early years, we would be spending more on admin because of like you're spending for staff time. And so you'll notice that spending that we have spent to date is like almost entirely on staff time and materials and services and consulting and city-wide overhead. But that I think adding that program spending will help add a little bit more context for where we're planning to spend the funds compared to it's
like this addition.
affordability is preserved. So another addition that we want to make to this slide is clarifying like units versus beds. But right now we have several shelters that are located in the core area that do offer, temporary housing or sort of emergency housing or even overnight housing for folks that are experiencing homelessness or kind of below that 30% AMI level. So wanted to like incorporate the progress and the momentum that council has put towards adding shelter capacity in the district. And so we've gone from sort of 90 beds to 246 beds since 2021 with the addition of the Project Turnkey shelter on Division Street, the Franklin Avenue shelter. But we want to kind of also contextualize that those are distinguished from units, like affordable units. And so we want to add like a unit count. Right now, we don't have any deed restricted affordable units in the district. There might be naturally occurring, but as far as deed restricted. So for total assessed value growth since plan inception, this shows the frozen base sort of value of assessed value of the district when the district was created, and then how we're seeing increment collection over time and what that average assessed value growth is. So we saw like a significant increase in assessed value growth in 2021 and 2022, or between 2020 to 2022, saw like a 2.67% growth rate in 2023. And then 2024, we saw that 0% growth rate. So you see kind of the increment that we collected in 2024 is very similar to the increment we collected in 2023. As we've noted, that's a lot because of this change in property, change property ratios that the county applies to different property types. So we're going to add a note about that on this slide just to help describe like why we're likely seeing 0% growth rate. The city also purchased some land, so I want to help contextualize this information a little bit more.
So the MUPD is going to temper that too, right? We'll see increment, but it'll be less than it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like Jack Straw will be the first project that comes online. We won't be collecting the increment from the residential portion of the project, but there's still 14,000 square feet of commercial investment that we will collect taxes on. And we just don't have I don't know exactly where that's going to land in the assessors. Same thing with even the timber yards phase A, they're going to be doing a significant, amount of ground floor commercial in that first phase.
Yeah.
So we'll collect taxes on that, but not the residential portion and for a 10-year period. And then we'll see a huge jump in increment.
It'll be an interesting thing. I mean, after we get the assessor stuff, we can kind of see, those out of those residential units, how much did it cost for them per unit, and it's like, I think that would be a really interesting metric to look at.
Yeah, yeah, we could definitely report on that. In 2026.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
And just with a quick eye on time, folks, so we can get everybody out on a beautiful afternoon like this. We have 15 minutes left for this meeting, so we need to do public comment as well. I don't see anybody online, but just in case. And then we do have some key takeaway recap from Allie. So just keep that in mind. We got 15 minutes left to get through this and those other things. Yeah. Because we're out of here at 5.
See anyone online for public comment, but I'll run through these next slides really quick.
Okay.
We don't have enough like information about funding that we're leveraging with TIF because we haven't like spent a lot of money on programs or investments yet. So more to come on this metric in the future. We are seeing sort of development activity spiked in 2021 as far as permit activity. It's kind of like dropped or stayed a little bit more stagnant. I will say though, in 2023, we saw an increase in new construction permits versus like remodels or alterations. So hopefully that 2023 sort of new construction helps create assessed value growth by 2025. So we have a whole board on permit activity in the core area, and there's a link here. So if you like want to geek out on more of this data, it's all there, like background detail. Yeah, but we do have like a dashboard for you all to help like evaluate what changes and permits are being implemented in the core area. And then just a brief overview of one of the goals is that the planning process is transparent. So we hosted 8 core area advisory board meetings last year. We received 10 public comments at those meetings. We also hired a consultant to engage with Latino businesses and ensure access to the core area business assistance program. One thing that I'll probably add that I didn't include in that change memo is that we have like a interested parties list of like almost 200 people that we send updates to when you all meet to kind of just give like an overview of what's on your agenda, decisions that are being taken. If council gets a presentation on like the Midtown crossings, we provide updates to that group. So we can add like 200, member listserv and how many updates we sent them in 2023.
Nice.
And then lastly, the area incorporates sustainable and low impact development principles. So just kind of some changes that happened in 2023. The Oregon Building Code was changed to now require 40% of parking spaces in a commercial building, including mixed use and multifamily buildings, to be served with EV charging infrastructure, up from 20% historically. The multiple unit property tax exemption program helped encourage sustainable development, with 2 applicants providing a high level of energy efficiency by either meeting LEED Platinum or Advantage Platinum certification, 2 applicants utilizing enhanced landscaping as their additional public benefit, and then 1 applicant providing at least 10% or more of their parking spaces with EV charging infrastructure. That's just for applications within the core area, not the Penn Avenue project. And then the city also took steps to initiate an update to the city's tree code. In 2023, adopted a home energy score program that helps provide additional data on energy usage within all homes that go for sale. And then Cassie also added another bullet about a recycling program that the city supported, that the environmental center started, that will add to this as well. So yeah, that's kind of like a general overview of how we're tracking with overall goals for the core area. Snapshot in time, and it's not perfect.
Work though.
Yeah.
When
Questions or comments?
when a commercial building includes EV charging, does that have to be publicly accessible?
They don't even have to provide a charger. They just have to provide the conduit for a charger to be able to be hooked up to it long term.
So no, like that's not like a
No, and even if it was connected to a charger, it doesn't have to be like a publicly accessible charger. It can just serve the residents or the business.
Other questions or comments on the metrics? I think I just wanted to share that I think it's just really important to take them in context, right? The snapshot in time piece that you mentioned really resonates, because there's some really bright spots in here, particularly around housing units. There's some other metrics that we would like to see in a different place. But I think when we look at those, we can really understand that the train is on the track for so many of those, right? Like the park search areas, the capital projects, right? We know all of those Midtown crossings, right, are moving forward and on the track. And so those numbers are going to start to look very different really quickly once those go. And then once we see some of these housing projects built, right, we will see more retail, more employment opportunities. So I think it's the snapshot in time is very important. So I think the context matters. And I think for so many of these things, like we really have like tremendously great like road ahead because the train's very much on the track for a lot of these. So that was just my point. I wanted to sort of share in context of like looking at this particular report this time. So yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Allie. A tremendous amount of work. I think really helpful and important to sort of tell the story of what we're up to here and holding ourselves accountable for being responsible stewards of these resources and the plan. So really appreciate it and know that it's just a ton of work. So thank you.
Yeah, and we'll add something about which projects are being funded with core area on the transportation investments. There was one other note, but I can't remember what it was of like a proposed change.
Okay. So and if I guess it's like, do you want a direction from this group on accept the memo?
Yeah,
the additional changes?
Yeah, if you kind of just direct, be like a head nod, just direct staff that we're on the right track.
You go.
Yeah,
Okay, cool, great. Thank you.
Roll forward, roll forward.
Does this get presented up to council at some point? Like,
We'll probably like send it to council in like their council memo process once you all sort of adopt it. And then when we have like quarterly check-ins with council, it's like another opportunity, I think, to just share.
I have a question. We like allocated certain amounts of money in the last several years that we've been meeting, like one was for the business assistance program and wasn't some for like Midtown Crossings too? Is there gonna be an update on like all the money we've allocated and like what's happened with it?
Yeah, so this report goes through the end of 2023. So like the Midtown project, like the contract with the consultant didn't get executed until, a couple months ago. And so at the end of 2024, when we report out again, you'll be able to see how much of the money towards each individual project was spent at the end of 2024, how much of the business assistance program was like distributed to businesses. And we'll also collect information from those businesses, like how much did you spend on your total project? And we can use that to help inform like how much funding was leveraged. Nothing was really spent by the end of 2023.
Yeah, and I think like if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's like, well, we had a $10 million increment, right? And we as a group allocated that money to a variety of things. And so I think like what you're asking is like, can we see that sort of summary recap here somewhere of like 10.5 is sort of what we had to allocate. Here's how we allocated it. And it's a little bit captured in that donut, but it's like it's like rolled up a little bit. And so having that sort of clarity around like we allocated X number of dollars to Second Street and X number of dollars to Franklin, right? And I think that's more, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we'll add at least like your programmed funds into that donut. And then in 2024, you'll be able to see how much we've spent towards those individual projects, because we'll have actually spent some money, whereas at the end of 2023, we hadn't.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was like, it's kind of an update on like, are we still spending that on the things that we allocated it for, or did some of it get shifted? Are we not going to spend it on some of the things?
We haven't shifted any of the funds like away from Hawthorne yet, like in borough's budget or council's budget, because we don't know the full like cost quite yet of Hawthorne, so we don't want to like shift the funding until we have a better picture. I think Second Street is coming in slightly over budget, so there will be a budget update to borough with some like slight changes to that CIP allocation specifically for Second Street. And Jonathan, do you know the timeline for when that goes to? The budget adoption process happens like in June.
Yeah, so there'll be two administrative changes. So there'll be the budget update in June, which is handled by our CIP team over there in the NPD. We've anticipated a 10% cost overage. So we're just doing that because it is a Bend urban renewal project. It's identified. So it's just kind of an assumed adjustment that you didn't bring to this group. But let's try to find, I think I processed a total for the core area urban renewal for the identified CIP projects of about 124,000 right this year. And that's for like temporary construction easements, site plans, engineering and design. But Garrett and Todd will probably draw a lot of additional invoices that I'll need to process as they move forward, a lot more. And then we'll just we'll have to have an IGA with the city and that we're crafting that probably in June because it's just reporting something.
Between the city and good.
For urban renewal agent. Yeah, between the urban renewal agent.
Last night I got.
Distinct.
It's like, you got it. You know, it's like,
All right, thank you. Still any kind of public comment? Do we have anyone joining us in the last, 5 minutes that would like time for public comment? No, okay, all right. Well, we got 5 minutes left. Key takeaways. Ally, close us out, please.
I don't really have anything to share. I think there was like one more thing that I wanted to share with you all, but now I can't remember, but I think we've pretty much covered it all. I think we're gonna be meeting with the development code subcommittee May 30th, and we have some presentations planned from some adaptive reuse projects that have taken place or tried to take place, specifically the Giving Plate project. I think that what you'll notice from some of while we're kind of focused on development code, some of the common issues or common themes that are rising are just infrastructure challenges on really outdated lots that end up becoming a financial barrier to smaller development projects. And so that the conversation about incentives and the business assistance program are going to mesh with the development code committee. And so just know that there isn't really a way to tease out project examples without bringing up the other financial burdens of developing infill lots that are really outdated.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that meeting and kind of diving into that a little bit more.
Great. All right. Any other final parting thoughts or comments for the group? All right. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Fun time, even though we started late.